I would like to introduce my first guest. He is a critically acclaimed horror writer, editor, magician, musician, poet, and proponent of post-left anarchy and culture jamming. An absolute force of nature with a resume stacked with accolades such as being the Australian representative for the Horror Writers of America, the president of the Australian Horror Writers Association, a four-time nominee for the Ditmar Award, as well as a member of the Ordo Temple Orientis, a member of the Temple of Psychick Youth, and the founder of the Aurora Australis Thelemic Temple. This is a podcast about religion, cults, and secret societies that are influenced by pop culture icons and works of fiction. When you want to make a podcast that speaks on Lovecraftian chaos magicians, pop culture, and horror influence on real life magical orders, cults, and religions, this is the man you speak to. Introducing our first guest ever on Faith from Fiction, the master, Frater Lux Nox, Leigh Blackmore. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you, Jake. That's very kind of you to say all those things in your introduction. Maybe a little over the top, but
No,
I'm
no.
a modest person.
He's humble. He's humble. We like that. We like it. We like a humble brag. So yeah, for those who don't know, Leigh, who you are, maybe a bit more of your background, if there's anything I left out there. Those who don't know, who are you? What do you do? And sort of maybe touch on who late HP Lovecraft is, just to
Okay.
get people, just a primer for people.
Well, I've been interested in supernatural fiction and horror fiction all my life, really, since I was a teenager.
Mhm.
And Lovecraft was instrumental in that for me, in that I first read HP Lovecraft stories when I was very young,
Mhm.
13 or so. And I'd never read anything like them, but I still would say that today, and I'm 64 now. So
Mhm.
he, Lovecraft is unique, and his place is a lot more secure now in the 21st century than it was back when I started getting into Lovecraft in the mid 70s, 1970s.
Mhm.
Um, and of course, in his own time, he was not not that he wasn't well regarded, but he was very little known. So a lot of things have changed now
I have
in
heard
regard
that
to that.
while when he was alive, he wasn't the name that he is now. Let's put it that way.
His principal market for his stories was the magazine Weird Tales. And Weird Tales was a newsstand magazine, but at the time it was only one among hundreds of other newsstand magazines, the pulps.
Yes, of course, the
And
old Pulp Fictions. Yep.
but yeah, Lovecraft was poorly paid and he found it difficult to get his stuff widely published.
Mhm.
And it was only really after he died and a guy called August Derleth set up Arkham House to publish Lovecraft and preserve him in hardcover that he started to become more popular.
Okay, that's interesting. So, based on that, what would you say H.P. Lovecraft's legacy is now? What is his influence on pop culture and fiction in general?
Well, Lovecraft sort of has penetrated nearly every sphere of pop culture that you can think of, whether it's, comics, films, um, other media.
Mhm.
His stories inspire a lot of people, and I must say that on the film side, it's rare. It's been rare, very rare, that anyone's successfully filmed a Lovecraft story. But
Right.
a lot of people seem to like trying. But
Yes.
yeah, he's widely influenced pop culture in the sense that his stories have this unique cosmic attitude,
Mhm.
and um, mankind or humankind, to use less gendered language, humankind is seen to be insignificant in his stories in terms of the wider universe at large. So the forces of the forces of what you'd call non-human intelligence
Hmm.
see humankind as insignificant ants almost. And yeah, that's Lovecraft's sort of a key theme.
Interesting. Was there actually any sort of occult influences in HP Lovecraft's real life? I know that his parents were committed, and I have listened to a few podcasts myself about some sort of correlations between Lovecraft and maybe his father being in a sort of Freemason order. Is there any
Yeah.
truth to that? Is there any real life occult
Look,
influence?
it's not certain that his father was a Freemason, and but even if he was, fr f Freemasonry is not all that esoteric, in comparison to many other things. There would have been a lot of business people that were in the Freemasons back in the day. So,
Yeah.
um, I've written on Lovecraft and the perception of him as an occultist,
Hmm.
which largely stems from writings by Kenneth Grant, the British
Yes.
occultist and Crowleyan.
Oh, well, that's
Which
something I wanted to bring up with you as well, actually, is
I
Kenneth Grant and that sort of thing, but we'll get into that in a bit. Do you think possibly the sort of psychotic ramblings of his parents and seeing things that aren't there, do you think maybe that had an effect on his sort of occultism and unforeseen things, his
yeah,
parents'
I
mental
think
health?
Lovecraft is a kind of a contradiction in some ways because he described himself as a mechanistic materialist, which means that he believed in the scientific method and he
Mhm.
wasn't into occult mumbo jumbo, but he was, well, if you, yeah, I'm not saying the occult is mumbo jumbo because I
No,
don't
I
believe it,
know. Yeah.
but he was an astronomer when he was young. He was into chemistry and he tested everything by a scientific method. But in his imaginative work, he often dipped into occultism. And of course, there's the cult of Cthulhu in his work,
Mhm,
which is about the alien gods and so on. So
mhm.
he was imaginatively able to go beyond the bounds of the commonplace, if you want to put it like that.
Interesting. So you mentioned earlier too that your first encounter with HP Lovecraft was when you were a teenager, and even at the age that you're at now, you still haven't found anything that's quite scratched that itch. What was some of the
Mhm.
first like sort of visceral feelings that came into play when you first read Lovecraft? Like I know the first time I read the Book of the Law or the Psychic
Mhm.
Bible from Genesis Peorage, it felt like I had just stepped into a whole other world. So, could you describe some of the feelings that you got when you
Yeah,
first
sure.
went into the world
Uh,
of H.P. Lovecraft?
Sure. Lovecraft, I think one of the things that attracted me to his work was the fact that it seemed to be a complete mythology of its own. And he was very good at connecting up different stories by using forbidden books and strange god names and these weird creatures that would sort of come in and out of different stories and kind of link them together. And
Hmm.
I was really drawn to the sort of the picture that he created of a complete cosmos, which was not known in all its infinite variety, but it did have certain elements in common. I'm not expressing that very well, but
I think I kind
it's
of get
kind
what you're
of
saying.
like a complete mythology.
Right? Is he? Would you say he's comparable to somebody, say, like James Joyce or William Burroughs or Robert Anton Wilson in that sort of way, or is it a
Um,
bit of a different thing?
well, there's there's certainly ways in which you could compare those writers,
Hmm.
um, but always Lovecraft is unique because of his own particular inventions, like Cthulhu and
Yeah.
all these other gods, Shub-Niggurath, Yog-Sothoth,
Yeah.
um, you know, um, these ancient gods that are always trying to break onto the earth from outer space and um, prove that really in the human world, we're far from the be all and end all, you know. We're
Yes.
only doing, we see what Clark Ashton Smith, who was a colleague of Lovecraft's, once described as the human aquarium. It's like a fishbowl that we're in, and we think we're like the center of the universe. But Lovecraft said, no, we're not the center of the universe.
It's very Gnostic. It kind of reminds me of The Matrix or the Lego movie or the Truman Show in that sort of sense.
Yeah, definitely. Um,
Excellent.
yeah, so I was always, pretty gripped by Lovecraft's writings, and his letters as well are worth exploring because he shows more of his actual philosophy in the letters,
Hmm.
which is a bit different from his stories. But on in both areas, he is pretty amazing. Like, he wrote more letters than probably any other um, human being. They
Oh,
think
really?
probably about 100,000 letters or something
Who
like that.
who were these letters addressed to?
Well, for Lovecraft, he this is like pre-internet age, of course. So way
Hmm.
back in 1930 and 1940, he
Hmm.
had a circle of correspondence that he corresponded with, who most of whom were writers or artists of some kind,
Hmm.
and so they shared their stories with each other. And Lovecraft actually got um, his circle to contribute names and sort of outre and unusual gods and forbidden books and things to the Lovecraft mythology. So then you get other writers that are sort of springing
Uh,
off from Lovecraft.
and that makes sense because I mean, like the whole Cthulhu mythos and a lot of Lovecraftian deities, other writers are just like, yeah, I'll take that, and they absolutely feel like it's just free to pull from the Lovecraft mythos and tie that into
Yeah,
their own story. So,
yeah,
and that's kind of the place where it started too. So that makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
That's
Um,
cool.
that has its good points and its bad points. So one of the bad points is that hardly anybody can, even though they think they can write like Lovecraft, hardly anybody can. And so there's a lot of not that great Cthulhu mythos fiction, but some people have done really good things with it. A writer called Michael Shea, for instance, he
Mhm.
has written some really great stuff.
Interesting. That's really cool. I want to move on for a little bit. I'm going to tie Lovecraft back into this, but I wanted to sort of see what was your first encounter with uh magic and chaos magic to be specific.
Okay.
Throwing a
Well,
bit of a spanner in the
that's
works, but
um
it will there is a method to the madness. I will be tying it together with
sure.
Lovecraft in a few questions. Yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, again, from a young age, I was really drawn to anything that was outside the what you norm, the norm sort of world, the Muggle world, as they call it in the Hogwarts
That's right.
um,
Yep.
Harry Potter books.
Hmm.
Um, anything that was unusual, and so supernatural stuff sort of seemed a natural attraction for me. And I had a society in my high school which was devoted equally to horror fiction and also to occultism. So I started to delve into things at an early age, and I went through a lot of different encounters with different spiritual groups and different
Yep.
occult ways of looking at the world.
Hmm.
And that's where it began. But to tell you the whole story would be a long story.
That's okay. Because this is a podcast, and I'm not going to assume that everybody that watches our conversation is an occultist or has
Hmm.
even have a basic understanding of magic with a K, chaos magic or thelemic magic. If you could you just give a personal summary on what chaos magic and magic is, how they work, and why it's practical for folks at home who aren't really in the know, who aren't invited to the party yet. Like
Okay.
your
Well,
elevator pitch for magic and chaos magic.
all right. Look, I'm not personally a chaos magician. I did delve into it. It
Mhm.
was probably more popular back in the 90s, to my knowledge, than it is now. There was an order called the Illuminates of Thanateros, which you may know of, the
They
IoT.
they are still around. The contact
Okay,
link, their contact link on their website is broken though. In case any IoT
right.
people who are also in IT, if you're in the IoT and you're also in IT, you guys need to fix your website.
Largely, I would say that chaos magicians were influenced by the occultist and artist Austin Osman Spare.
Mhm.
I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was
Absolutely. I have one of his
an
artworks on a
amazing guy.
t-shirt somewhere here.
Right.
Yeah.
He had a technique called sigil magic, and what it involved was basically you have to concrete your desires. So, say you want to be better at some particular skill, or you want something, some development to take place within your life, you write down a sentence, and then you cross out all the duplicate letters, and you put the leftover letters into one symbol. So you write them over the top of each other, and what you're left with is one single symbol. And then you concentrate on that hard. And
Mhm.
the theory of it is that it goes into your subconscious and it helps you concrete that desire in your life and the things that you do. And
Yeah,
that was hugely influential on chaos magic.
absolutely. So just for anybody who's sitting at home is like, what is Leigh talking about? So you start out with a sentence and then you put the symbols all on top of each other and then it should turn out looking something like this. Um,
Absolutely.
great. No,
Um,
that's perfect. Yeah.
Thelemic magic is a huge subject, but I'll try and sort of summarize a couple of the main things in a really short space of time.
Okay.
Um, Thelema, for a start, means will, and Aleister Crowley, who channeled or brought forth Thelema, um, his main slogan, which a lot of people have heard, was "Love is the law, love under will," and also "Every man and every woman is a star." And those sayings come from a writing of Crowley's that he received supposedly from a discarnate intelligence.
Hmm.
So that discarnate intelligence can be seen as the higher self of all
Hmm.
of us. Um, but some people take it as, an actual entity outside of humankind. But however that might be,
Hmm.
Crowley believed in each individual reaching his full potential. So every man and every woman is a star, but always under love. So love is the law, love under will, and will is the central tenet of Thelema.
Hmm.
Um, Crowley believed that with our wills we can cause change, and that's an act of magic.
Absolutely.
So that's like it, kind of in a nutshell, but then you can go off to all sorts of different interesting areas of Thelema as well.
There's a lot of tangents. We could probably spend all day just talking about Thelema and Aleister
Yeah.
Crowley and surrounding Thelemites. Um, okay, so now that people sort of understand who HP Lovecraft is, what your connection is to him, what magic is, and how that sort of works, I would like your thoughts on Kenneth Grant integrating HP Lovecraft into his Typhonian OTO order, because correct me if I'm wrong, Lee, but I do believe that Kenneth Grant he was an understudy, a receptionist for Aleister Crowley, and then he actually got to hang with Austin Osman Spare, the Chaos Magic guy, for a bit, and learnt a bunch off of him. But then later in his life, he started to sort of proclaim that Crowley channeling, uh, Austin Osman Spare, automatic writing, and H.P. Lovecraft were all pulling from the same source. What are your thoughts on that? And how much validity do you feel is in Kenneth Grant's writing? Because I've heard that a lot of it's very wordy and not quite as cohesive
Yeah.
as some of the other occult writers.
Well, Grant is an interesting and controversial figure. He based a lot of his work, his actual own his own magical work, on Crowley's system. But what he did was he sort of took it and ran with it, and he went in a different direction. And he was much more interested in the idea of kind of alien intelligences and that sort of thing. I guess to get a real grip on it, you have to actually try and read a Kenneth Grant book. And Grant's writings are incredibly strange.
Hmm.
There's a lot of good stuff in there, but he also uses Kabbalah, which is the Hebrew esoteric system, based on the Tree of Life. He uses Kabbalah in a way that's highly debatable. So for me, Grant's a
Okay.
fascinating read, but I disagree with a lot of his conclusions.
Interesting. It's his
Um,
books are very hard to come by too, aren't they?
yeah, they're being reprinted by Starfire Books in UK, so most of them should be in print now or
Oh,
soon to be sort of thing. But yeah, he wrote a 9 volume um treatise really on all his own magic and Crowleyan magic. There were 3 trilogies. So the first trilogy came out sort of in the 1980s, and then he continued to add books to it right up until his death.
interesting. I have tried to acquire a Kenneth Grant book. It was Night Side of Eden. This was
Uh-huh.
many years ago, but it was $800, and I can't
Right.
I can't spend $800 on a
That
book.
would have been a first edition, I'd say.
Yeah,
But there
yeah,
are cheaper reprints available. You still might be looking at 80 to $100 for a book. But
that's fine.
yeah, Grant also, we shouldn't neglect to mention that he had a partner, a magical partner called Steffi Grant.
Hmm.
That was his wife, and she was an amazing occult artist. So in his books, he often featured her artwork amongst a lot of other artists that were doing interesting illustrative work.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, no, I'm aware of Steffi Grant. I knew she was an artist. I didn't realize she did the artwork for his book covers and stuff like that. But that's
Yeah,
very
she
cool.
often did. Yeah.
That's cool. Okay, so do you think the use of Lovecraftian deities in chaos magic was popularized in the 80s because of Kenneth Grant's Typhonian OTO Lovecraft influence, or the publication of Peter Lavender, James Wasserman, and Larry K. Barnes' Necronomicon? Or do you think maybe it was a factoring thing of both? Or maybe it was just because HP Lovecraft's pantheon just slid right into actual occult practice
Yeah. I
seamlessly?
think it's a combination of all those things, Jake.
Hmm.
Because Lovecraft used this technique, which I call pseudo authenticity. I I think I've taken that term from a book about Lovecraft. Actually, I didn't invent it, but
I like it.
he he his technique in a story, this is Lovecraft we're talking about,
Hmm.
was to prepare the groundwork by making everything as convincing as possible, and then introduce maybe just 1 or 2 elements that would be mind shattering or soul altering.
Hmm.
And um, because of that pseudo authenticity, Lovecraft's stories seem really convincing. And so many occultists have found that they're so convincing that they are tempted to use Lovecraft's creations in their own magical work. So, for instance, in Kenneth Grant's books, just to go back to him for a minute,
Hmm.
um, he first published some stuff by Michael Bertio, um, who is a very interesting modern magician, still alive, still practicing, an artist as well. Bertio was probably one of the first to do Cthulhu magic and to go, well, we're going to use Lovecraft's gods and as though they are just the same as any other pantheon of gods and goddesses.
Hmm.
Um, we'll call on Shub-Niggurath, or we'll conjure up Azathoth or whatever. Bertio kind of pioneered that in Chicago in the 80s. Grant wrote about it because it kind of tied in with his whole take on things as well.
Okay, so they kind of influenced each other, Bertio and Grant, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So was Bertio one of the people that sort of had the real life Cthulhu cults? Because I've heard of these sort of rumblings on, Reddit and
Yeah,
Wikipedia.
he would do things like go down to a lake near Chicago, and they, with his coven, they'd call up Cthulhu, and they had rituals that related to that, and I presume they had experiences as well. And as with any magical or occult experience, it can be very subjective, or it can be, you know, whatever you want it to be. And but also later on there was the Esoteric Order of Dagon, which had members from America and England and other places as well. And sorry, the EOD, for short, Esoteric Order of Dagon, comes from Lovecraft's story The Shadow over Innsmouth.
Okay.
The occult EOD
Hmm.
did similar things to what Bertio did. So they had rituals that were written by them. They put out magazines and publications, and they did all this Lovecraftian sort of occult um, writing and work.
Hmm.
But the EOD sort of faded after a period of time. I think it's been revived a couple of times, maybe still going today. I'm not sure.
Interesting. So that's the genesis of that sort of. I've been very interested in that for a while. Leigh, I would like to know, as someone who has been a part of the Temple of Psychic Youth and been akin to chaos magic and magical orders, obviously you've done a lot of ritual in your life. Have you ever worked with a Lovecraftian deity in a ritual setting, or even just a pop culture figure in general? Have you ever just like meditated on a statue of Batman? And if you have, what were the results?
Well, look, I've done all sorts of magical work. I haven't meditated on a figure of Batman, and to be honest, I haven't used a Lovecraftian figure in magical work because I don't completely. It just hasn't completely drawn me. I can understand why it draws other people, but I've worked with the Goetia, which is the demonology
Hmm.
practice that emanates from King Solomon and his magic, the medieval grimoires and that sort of thing. And I've worked with all sorts of pagan groups as well as what would commonly be known as ritual magic groups. And it's hard to sum up in a few words. Um, Meditating on a deity is always a valuable magical practice.
Hmm.
I ran a group from home last year where we did a working with Baphomet, which is if you're familiar with Baphomet, that
Absolutely, the
symbol.
horned god with the hermaphroditic
Yeah,
Solve Coagula doing this one, busting
absolutely.
busting a
Yeah.
Saturday Night Fever dance move.
Yeah, that's right. It's the image that Eliphas Levi, who was a 19th century French magician, he originated it. But
Yeah.
it's very central to Thelema in many ways. Crowley called himself Baphomet as well.
Yes,
It
it
was
was
like
with
his
An X
magical
on the end though,
title.
wasn't it? Baphomet X, was it?
Uh, the X may have been the cross. He had various symbols, but there
He
was a
did.
particular cross that he used alongside that Baphomet title.
So, do you think, how there's the, chaos magicians who have used Lovecraftian deities or people who have used characters from Dragon Ball Z? And yourself, Leigh, you've worked with goetic demons. Some people say that these are just parts of our subconscious that we are able to attribute things to and connect with and speak to, whether that's Iwas, the holy guardian angel, or fae or fairy folk or UFOs. Um, do you think that when people use Lovecraftian rituals, or even Goetia, these are all the same thing, but they just take on the form of whatever sort of mythology or pop culture that is ingrained in our consciousness? Like all of these non-local consciousness are actually all the same sort of creature, but the way that they appear to us in our mind's eye is just basically based on our upbringing. I don't know if that
Yeah.
question made a lot of sense,
Um,
but
no, I get what you're driving at. The
mm,
psychology of magic is interesting, and because every man and every woman is a star, and we're all unique and individual and different, we, to some extent, I think, have things that are different from one person to the next. So
mhm.
what is potent and magical for you might be different from what's for the next person, if you know what I mean.
I do, I do.
Um,
Yep.
but also we have that commonality of being human, and those commonalities are things that we can draw on to in ritual and magic. So it all depends what your purpose is in doing a magical ritual.
Mhm.
And yeah, look, we live in a melting pot sort of age where people like to cherry pick from this and that and throw it all together in the pot.
Mhm.
And I don't necessarily see anything wrong with that. But
No.
some traditions like Thelema, tend to keep it a bit purer and concentrate on certain aspects of things.
Yes, keep it more traditional. I wanted to ask Lee, so you haven't really worked with Lovecraftian deities yourself. Um,
I could.
hey,
I could easily do that, but I've chosen not to.
that's fair. I, you were saying before about how lots of people like to cherry pick from things and sort of build their
Mhm.
own BS. Um, that doesn't mean bullshit. That means belief system. No.
Oh, okay. Yep.
um, so my question to you is like, did you think it's better and more practical as a magician to learn a full system of magic, say the Golden Dawn system or the Thelemic system, rather than cherry pick from various things like quantum mysticism, a little bit of quantum mysticism, a little bit of Wicca and stuff? Do you think maybe it's better to be more streamlined? I think in my early 20s, like I read the Psychic Bible, Genesis, Peerage, Temple
Uh-huh.
of Psychic Youth. That was the first practical
Yeah, the
guide.
Psychic Bible was a big influence on me, and Genesis P. Origin stuff before that as well. Yeah, for a long time.
Yes, so do you think maybe it's better to learn, because I notice in my older age I'm less chaos magician. I'm less like, yeah, we'll just learn from everything. Now I find myself I'm going through the entire Kabbalah, the Thoth Tarot, doing Liberesh every day. Um,
Okay,
I'm playing by the rule book now, essentially. Whereas in my
okay.
early 20s, I was very like, nah, like I was full on coyote.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you
I
think
I
that
get
that
where you're coming from.
Do you think that's a natural sort of change in the life of a magician or an occultist?
I think it is, Jake. I think things resonate with you differently depending what age you are and what your experiences are.
Hmm.
And you're going to be drawn to certain things at different times in your life. But as you progress in reading about magic and maybe doing it as well, because
Hmm.
not everybody that just reads about it practices magic.
We call them
Um,
armchair magicians. They've got
Armchair
a
magicians.
yeah.
Reading is really important, and I know this for myself that but you can get lost in it if you're not actually doing the work. So
Mhm.
there's got to be a balance, and I'm trying to get back to your original question, but I think it's a big yes and no, really.
Mhm.
I think taking from things, different traditions, can be really valuable
Mhm.
because it gives you a wide perspective and it gives you a handle on the way different cultures work, for instance. You might be looking at esoteric Sufism or
Hmm.
the Kabbalah. Um, the Western magical tradition is largely based on the Kabbalah, but
Yes,
different
absolutely.
there are
It's
there
like
are all sorts of,
Kabbalah and Hermeticism. It seems
yeah.
seems mostly in alchemy.
Um, but some people find that it comes naturally to them to go, okay, well, I'm just going to follow the rule book, so called, and the Golden Dawn has massively influenced Western Hermeticism and Western magic, and so you can join any one of half a dozen different modern Golden Dawn orders. Likewise with Crowleyan magic, you can join the OGO or you can join other groups which claim to be Thelemic in the
Well,
modern times.
it's funny you say that. I uh accidentally stumbled on a version of the Hermetic Golden Dawn here in Brisbane. So I've been, Leigh, I'm an explorer. Like when I first got into this sort of thing, if Temple of Psychic Youth was around,
Uh-huh.
I 100% would have been right with you there at the station, Toppy Chaos. That would have been my go-to.
Right.
But that's unfortunately, as you know, Toppy's not around. So I found other things. I found the OTO. I found the Theosophical Society, Illuminates of Thanateros, even just the old Chaos Magic Reddit group.
Mm.
Um, oh geez, I
Well,
can't.
I can really understand that, and we're all seekers. If we're interested in these sorts of things, we're seeking
Mm,
maybe truths about ourselves or the world around us, and
mhm.
the search for wisdom is just an endless quest, I think. But I'm always very fond of a saying that Israel Regardie, who was one of Crowley's students, and he was a secretary to Crowley, said,
Mhm.
and that was, we're all students. Like, no matter how advanced you become as a magician, you're still a student, and there's endless things to learn. So I always look on it as an endless learning experience.
It really is, though. Like the more answers you get, you don't really get answers. You just have more questions.
Yeah,
In
that
regards. Mm,
sorry,
no, you're
I
right.
agree. I agree, but it doesn't mean that you can't, derive great truths from certain practices, and
There are universal truths. There are threads that sort of unlock.
yeah,
I
yeah,
love I love
and if
Israel Regardie too. Another great quote I love from him. I think it's Israel Regardie is be persistent in your practice and practice your persistence.
oh, okay, that's a good one. Yeah,
Yeah, I know. I'm a big Regardie fan. I have the 1 year manual, and it hasn't left my backpack in like 5 years because it's just
right. Wow.
it's my main one that I always refer back to for like whether it's Liberesh or even just pranayama breathing exercises. I feel like Regardie was a little bit more palatable and digestible for me rather than
Uh-huh.
yeah
Sure, and
other writers.
you have to go where you led to,
Hmm.
Some people find Crowley's writings, for instance, they find them really impenetrable. And Crowley can be difficult for a lot of people, especially in this day and age, because
Hmm.
let's face it, it was well over 100 years ago
Yeah.
that Thelema originated. It started in 1904. So, and Crowley was a person of his times who was just coming out of the Victorian era, and his um, kind of rebellion against the Victorian social mores and all that was great for its time and very revolutionary. And
Hmm.
yet, in a lot of ways, we've moved way on from there as well. But that doesn't. Yeah, I'm getting into a verbal knot here.
No, but it's okay. I think I know what you mean. Like Crowley's stuff was very wordy, and I think he gave too much credit to the people of the future, and he didn't really think about putting it in layman's terms. He thought everybody would have read the same things as him, and
Yeah.
that's my advice to
It,
anybody who wants to study Aleister Crowley is don't read any Crowley. Go and read Lon Milo Duquette or Jason Louv or even
I
just Even Genesis Peorage is a good primer to get into
Sure. No,
Crowley.
make them starting points for sure. I mean,
Mm.
I think I wouldn't say don't read any Crowley because I
Sorry,
think one.
yes, I don't mean don't read any at all, but to first get the gears turning, I think he's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, you Crowley has a lot to say, and you really it's quite well advised to use some kind of a primer to get into his system.
Yeah.
Like, and the Lon Milo Duquette stuff is excellent.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, to actually dispel some of the myths about Crowley, it's really important to read some of what he wrote because a lot of people go, "Oh, Crowley, I wouldn't, black magic, sacrificing babies, and all these myths and things that he never wrote about."
Yeah.
Um, if you haven't actually read his stuff, that magic is about life, love, law, and liberty, then you're really missing the point. You have to read Crowley to really get his take on things.
I think a lot of people see him as sort of the pantomime arch nemesis villain caricature, like pop culture villain. And a lot of people will be attracted to that first up, which is totally fair enough. But I know this. There's a lot of people who are like, yes, I love Aleister Crowley, but they're into dark fluff. They like things that are scary and spooky, And
Sure.
it's always funny to me because Aleister Crowley, the wickedest man in the world. Ooh. But when I actually started reading his stuff and implementing the practices, whether that's meditation or liberesh,
Hmm.
it makes me a happier person. It makes me a
Hmm.
more rounded human being. I have a bigger scope. I'm able to have more thought control, oppose every thought with its opposite. It changes you for the
Yeah,
better. You should make you a nicer person, a more understanding person.
yeah,
But I think
yeah.
some people are like, ah, do what thou wilt means do whatever I want, and I'm an edgy mall goth. You know what I mean? They completely miss
Exactly.
the
Oh,
point.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a lot of, that's the sort of adolescent approach to magic. And I really liked what you said there about opposing every thought with its opposite, because that's a really crucial Crowley teaching that you have to be able to resolve what seem to be apparent contradictions in thought and all that sort of
Exactly.
thing.
When I first
Um,
started implementing that through meditation, I was only implementing it like I would have a negative thought and I would crash it with a good thought. Although that was, but no, he meant every thought. If you have a good thought, smash it with the opposite in a negative light too. You know what I mean? That's it really it makes you
it's
see things
really
from all
about,
sides.
yeah, absolutely. And it's about not relying on rationality, which in the Western world we do rely on what we call rationality
Hmm.
um, too much. And it's about recognizing that you have to sort of balance rationality with things that are apparently irrational, things that are ineffable, things that are spiritual, and by their very nature resist definition.
Hmm.
So, yeah, thanks for using that quote about
Oh, it,
contradictions in thought.
it honestly changed my life for the better. And like I said, when I first got into this sort of thing and was meditating every day, LBRP every day, Liberesh, like I said, it was very toxic positivity. Now I see it's like not every negative thought you have is necessarily a negative thought. It's just one part of the whole truth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
Leigh, so this is the part of the interview I have been the most excited for.
Yeah.
Since I discovered who you were, I was, believe it or not, I was 23 years old when I read the Psychic Bible. I did some digging on the back end of the internet and I came across Toppy Chaos and your name was attached to it. And that's how I added you on Facebook. And I have been wondering, Leigh, as someone who's grown up in Australia, not the same era as you, it's really interesting to my friends and I, people who are around my age who have read the Psychic Bible, it's really interesting to us what life was like for you in the late 80s and early 90s in Toppy Chaos in Sydney, and that sort of vibe tribe adjacent scene down there that you guys had in Sydney. How did you come across the Temple of Psychic Youth? What was your sort of first contact with Genesis? And
Well, yeah.
and what was Toppy Chaos in Sydney like? What was the
Mm.
prime motivator there? What did you guys
I
get
I
up to?
had I'd read a number of things. Memory is sort of failing me in some ways, but um, I'd read a lot of things by Genesis P. Origin. I was into Throbbing Gristle, which was his original industrial band.
Yep.
And so from that, when he changed his band to Psychic TV and he set up the Temple of Psychic Youth, it just hit me at the right time. I was very receptive to it. And there was a particular album by Psychic TV called Force the Hand of Chance.
Mm-hmm.
And that had a track on it, which was a message from the temple, a message from the Temple of Psychic Youth.
Yep.
And it was a track that you could put on and you could meditate to. And it was about fulfilling your own potential. It was about just don't put any boundaries on yourself. And that was very powerful for me at the time I encountered it. Um, then, yeah, Temple of Psychic Youth was sort of pretty active back then and mainly based in London because Genesis Peerage was British, of course, and
Mm-hmm.
but set up what they called stations around the world, mainly in the States and Australia, I think, but some in Europe. Um, Topi Chaos was run by a couple of young guys, probably about the age you are now, Jake. And
Yep.
yeah, I got involved. I was actually in the OTO, Crowley's magical organisation in Sydney at the same time, but Topi Chaos were around, and OTO used to run a series of dramatic rituals, which were Crowley's Rites of Eleusis.
Yes, I'm
Um,
aware. I'm aware of Eleusis. Yep. Yep.
there's a series of 7 of them,
Mm-hmm.
and at one point they got different magical groups that were around at the time to come to Sydney and do one of these rituals each. So there was a whole series of them. Um,
Great
Topi
idea.
Topi did a ritual, I think from memory it might have been the Rite of Mars, and they did it in a very Genesis Peorage way. It was they spoke the old-fashioned words, but they did it with really modernistic props and stuff. So it was pretty powerful. Yeah, we used to meet at the old Newtown Neighbourhood Centre at Newtown, um, which I don't know if it's still there now, but um, there was a lot of stuff that went on back then, and that series of Rites of Eleusis was pretty powerful, and that introduced me to Topi.
So you met Topi through the OTO, essentially,
Essentially, yeah.
in
Although I
in a
didn't know
meandering sort
because
of way.
yeah, I was seeking, I was always looking for the OTO, and I finally found it in Sydney, and it was still existing and all that. I was also really interested in the Temple of Psychic Youth through the promotions that were happening from the Psychic TV band, so
Interesting. Looking for the
I was,
OTO is literally the name of a Throbbing Gristle song, isn't it?
yeah, it is,
Yeah,
yeah. And
that's
that was
cool.
like my mantra, I'm looking for the OTO. Where is it? I
Yeah.
eventually found it.
Throbbing, you know what? It's funny you say that. Throbbing Gristle songs are actually great for mantras. When I was trying to learn discipline, just repeating, I need discipline. I need was very effective for me. So yeah, I can
Yeah,
relate to
right.
that. So Toppy Chaos. So you've met them through the rites of Euless. How do you pronounce it?
Eleusis.
Eleusis.
Yeah.
You met them through the rites of Eleusis. And then what was the sort of journey from seeing them there and being blown away by their act for Mars? I'm sure I could imagine with its Genesis PR, they would have had laser pointers and screens with video collages and
Yeah, it wasn't quite that elaborate at that stage, but
okay,
they did actually go on and they did a number of performances around Sydney, and they actually had a band of their own called Heathen Earth. And I used to go and see Heathen Earth up around Oxford Street and stuff, where they
Right.
did performances, and they hosted evenings like they did one at the AFI Cinema,
Hmm.
um, and where they had guest bands and all sorts of back projection slides and all that lighting and
Yeah.
amazing imagery and stuff like that. So yeah, one particularly memorable Heathen Earth gig that I saw, they had a pig set on stage, and
Okay.
yes, it was pretty full on.
It's very metal. I like it. Um,
Yeah.
so how many people were in Toppy Chaos in Sydney? Was
Ah,
there
look, it was minuscule. I
Mhm.
mean, it had an influence that was out of all proportion to the size and the number of the membership, and in a way, that's like the OTO. The
Mhm.
OTO internationally today probably has 1,000 members or a couple of thousand members at the most. I'm not really sure
Oh,
because
really?
I'm not in the OTO currently.
Oh,
I work
okay.
I work with Crowley's other um, magical group, the AA, more than anything.
Yep.
But what I'm trying to say is that small things can achieve great effects, and
Mhm.
I kind of look on that as a principle of magic. Too, you can make small changes in whatever,
Mhm.
and they can produce really powerful effects like that. I guess it's like that idea of the butterfly flapping its wings in South America, and the ripples go out and changes happen thousands of miles away.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. Well, at the height of their powers, to you, not really the right word, but at the height of their pinnacle, the Temple of
mhm.
Psychic Youth had about 10,000 people worldwide, which is pretty darn incredible. Really, when you
Yeah,
when you
okay.
think
That's
about
that's
it.
more that's more than I knew of, to be honest. But it was always it was a very idealistic organization, but they were very active for a long period of time.
Mhm.
And I was one of the people that joined locally, like we've talked about. And what they used to have a thing where you would conduct a certain magical ritual with a sigil,
This
and
is
you
my
would
next. This is my next
send it
question.
in. Yeah.
So partaking in the 23 sigil, Leigh, did Toppy Chaos, did you send the sigil in? Did you have fingernails, hair, and bodily fluids in there? Did everybody do it at 2300 hours? Were you guys,
No,
was
no.
Toppy Chaos a part of the sigil,
The
the
Sydney
23
group
sigil?
was pretty loose.
Mm-hmm.
The Sydney group was pretty loose, and they put out publications which were basically recirculated from London, or overseas, Topi.
Yep. Yep.
I sent my sigil into London
Yep.
because that was the main centre of it.
And so
So that was like,
did you partake in the 23 sigil? Did you do it for 23 months? Did you
I didn't do it for 23 months. I did a one-off ritual where,
Okay. Yep.
I just concreted my desires, and I did the sigil, and there it was, and I sent it in, and I went, here it is, I've done it. And they wrote back, that's what they would do from London headquarters, and they would say, okay, every sigil that's been sent in has been, preserved and put on file here. So,
Yeah, they're still surviving the archive somewhere. Apparently, Scotland Yard took them all. That's what I heard.
oh, okay, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, so Scotland Yard raided Genesis's house and took everything. It was it was
Yeah,
it was very
yeah, he
akin.
went through a bad time in that era.
Yeah, it was very akin to sort of what Timothy Leary went through, or what Aleister Crowley went through. It's that
Mm,
that that sort of thing.
yeah,
Well, Lee, this brings me to bring it back to pop culture being mixed with
yeah.
magic. Now, Brian Jones died for our sins. Brian Jones being the Christ archetype, the deification of Brian Jones. How much did you connect with that? Are you a Rolling Stones fan? Do you see merit in using Brian Jones as a sort of non-binary hermaphroditic deity
Yeah, why
within the
not?
confines
Why
of
not?
chaos
It's
magic?
all
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
It's all good. Brian Jones was an amazing musician, and he's still underappreciated today. And I had a copy of Psychic TV's single that they wrote about Brian Jones called
God
God
Star.
Star, and I used to play that a lot.
Hmm.
But I've never been a big Stones fan, I must admit. I like some of their tracks, but yeah, they're not my favorite band. But yeah, Brian Jones and
Hmm.
his connection with the what are they called, the magicians of Jajuka,
Jajuka,
musicians of Jajuka,
the Jujuka
with the
pan flute.
trance pan
Yeah,
pipes and all that
yeah.
sort of thing. I mean, he was really delving into some interesting areas that were outside, the standard pop sort of mentality of the time.
It's very full circle that you mentioned that too, because Brian Geisen was actually the person that introduced that the Jajuka music to Brian
Yeah,
Jones. And then obviously
yeah,
you know
yeah.
who Brian Geisen is because
Brian Gyson's another amazing character, isn't he?
he is, and I guess the biggest influences on Temple of Psychic Youth, Toppy, I like correct me if I'm wrong, would be Brian Jones, Brian Geisen, William Burroughs, Austin Osman Spare, and Aleister Crowley. That kind of helped build their uh instructions for sigilling and
Sure,
magic
yeah.
in general,
I
right?
I think there's a way in which like pioneers and um explorers in spiritual spaces um tend to find each other,
Hmm.
because if you sort of trying to push the envelope and trying to explore what's on the edge in magic, you're liable to come across these writings, so a lot of people know about Burroughs and Geisen maybe through magic, or then again they might start with Burroughs and Geisen and um
Find magic through that.
find magic through that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I didn't read Naked Lunch until I had discovered Genesis Pure, and I'd already read the Psychic Bible, and I'm definitely interested in William Burroughs as an occultist and someone who has hacks for short circuiting control and hacking reality. But yeah, I like his books. I've been able to sort of start reading them since then. But yeah, it's definitely more of the with Brian Geisen and William Burroughs, it's definitely more like the cut up technique and building dream machines and that sort of thing that really appeals to me.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, experimenting with consciousness, they did a lot. The Dream Machine in particular,
Hmm.
that was a really interesting technique. But Geisen was way ahead of a lot of people. And Burroughs always used to say, "Oh, Brian Geisen says that art is 50 years ahead of, no, painting is 50 years ahead of writing,"
Writing.
and
Yep,
that's why he started doing the cut-ups, the literary cut-ups,
that's
to
right.
try and get writing into the same realm as Geisen's painting, which was all like almost like automatic art that Austin Osman Spare would do, So all these connections sort of link into each other.
They do. I mean, like you look at something like Naked Lunch, William Burroughs, there's a bit of cut up in there, and then you look at James Joyce, in
Uh-huh.
his dream-like sort of way of writing, cut up and dream talk, kind of the dream language that
Yeah,
James Joyce uses.
kind of stream of consciousness.
Yeah, they're kind of similar, aren't they?
Yeah, 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 they have a lot in common.
Um, Couple more questions, then we can start wrapping up here, Lee. This has been a great talk
Okay.
so far. Um, Hermetic horrors, weird fiction writers, and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. So we got Bram Stoker, W.B.
Oh, okay.
Yeats, and this was a book. This is Hermetic horrors, weird fiction, and the writers. Weird fiction writers and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. That was a book that you wrote a long time ago, correct?
Yeah, it was actually just an extended essay. And it was because my main interests are horror fiction and the occult.
Yes.
So I was always reading in certain books that this person and that person had been in the Golden Dawn, right?
Hmm.
And because of my interest in horror writers, I knew that some of them hadn't been. And so I sort of wrote an essay to sort out who was really in the Golden Dawn, who wasn't, and that sort of thing. Like Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula, he often gets mentioned as a Golden Dawn member, but he wasn't.
Oh,
Whereas
okay. Okay. Yep.
Algernon Blackwood,
Hmm.
who's a famous weird fiction writer, and Arthur Machen, also another old school horror writer. They were
Hmm.
both in the Order of the Golden Dawn because they were into mysticism. Mysticism imbued all their stories and their writings, and they went into the Order of the Golden Dawn to try and expand their consciousness, I would say.
Hmm.
Blackwood got a lot more out of it than Arthur Machen. Arthur Machen found it to be dressing up in costumes, and he didn't find it very rewarding, and so he
Okay.
got out of it early.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Interesting.
So yeah, I
So,
just went through a whole lot of other people who were mentioned as well. Somebody said Oscar Wilde was in the Order of the Golden Dawn. Well, no, but he
don't
was
think
around
so.
at the time. He
Well,
was around at the same time.
oh, absolutely. He's got a quote about Crowley. What's Oscar Wilde's quote on Crowley? He's like, Aleister Crowley thinks he's some sort of is some sort of maniac who thinks he's Aleister Crowley, which I thought was brilliant. Um, so Bram Stoker wasn't in the Golden Dawn. So basically, Hermetic Horrors was your way of sort of debunking misinformation that was out there about two
Yeah,
things that
that's
you're
right.
passionate about.
Yeah.
Um, do you think being an author goes hand in hand with being a magician? And how much did the horror writing of the Golden Dawn members influence the actual rituals? Or was it the opposite with the rituals of the Golden Dawn influencing the writing of its members? A combination of both or neither?
Um, Again, I think it's a combination answer, a yes and no,
Mhm.
because sorry, I'm a bit frog-throated.
That's okay.
Um, because the Golden Dawn dealt with realms of consciousness and imagination,
Hmm.
it was natural that writers and artists would be attracted to it, right? So W.B. Yeats, who's one of the greatest poets of the English language,
Hmm.
um, was in the Golden Dawn and was a major figure in the Order of the Golden Dawn. Um, it just so happens that he also was able to um, put his vision into poems that people still read today.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not sure if this is really addressing your question because I've kind of lost track a bit, but
That's okay. I
uh,
kind of asked like five questions in one. So it's like yes, the horror writing influence the Golden Dawn rituals, or more the Golden Dawn rituals influence the writing, or a combination of both.
oh, okay.
Hmm.
With horror writing, I'd say, look, I can only put it down to the fact that both horror writing, the sort of writing that I'm interested in is supernatural or cosmic fiction, not
Hmm.
so much your slasher fiction type horror.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
And because supernatural horror is about the things that are beyond the mundane, so is occultism, right? So
Hmm.
they influenced each other, or they have that commonality where somebody like Blackwood, who is really a nature mystic, um, by birth, he just had that sort of identification with nature and with nature as a living spirit. He wrote horror stories and ghost stories that expressed the same point of view, but he could equally well have written occult fiction or something like that. I'm not sure if that really addresses what you're asking,
Well,
but I'm trying to get a handle on it.
so you've done interviews. You've interviewed Whitley Strieber, and you've interviewed Clive
Clive
Barker.
Barker?
Yes.
Yeah, Clive
Right.
Barker.
So if you look at like Whitley Strieber, he wrote fiction and then started meditating, and then his sort of things that happen in communion are very akin to like fairy folk stories in old Europe.
Yeah,
Do you
yeah.
think maybe that the latent part of like the imagination is the fifth dimension, and being a writer means that intuitively you are open to those things occurring and being able to speak with non-local consciousness, like it helps
Oh,
having an
absolutely.
imagination? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that the muse that writers talk about, the ineffable muse that inspires you to create some work of newness, like whether it be art or fiction or whatever,
Hmm.
that muse, that inspirational part of us, is really, it's just integral to occultism as well. And you just mentioned Clive Barker a minute ago.
Hmm.
He wrote a couple of books where he talked about the fact that magic is art and art is magic. Um, the book The Great and Secret Show,
Hmm.
and it has a sequel, um, really goes into that. So Clive Barker's stuff is really interesting about the link between art and magic and how really they're the same things.
Right.
If that
Okay.
makes sense.
That does. It
So
does. And
yeah.
it's something that I sort of know, but I sort of wanted to hear your take on it and an explanation for the audience. See, I see things like Grant Morrison. He wrote The Invisibles. He based the main
Uh-huh.
character on himself. The main characters had a lung failure. Then 3 months later, he had a lung failure. He gave the main character this girlfriend.
Right.
Then all of a sudden, all of his girlfriends had aspects of that character. Or Doug Munch, the comic book writer. He was writing a comic book for Planet of the Apes. Brutus, the gorilla bad guy, broke into the human hero's house and held the human hero's wife up with a gun to her head to force the human hero to do whatever he wanted. In that moment, Doug Mensch hears his wife call from the other end of the house after he's just finished writing the last word on that story or the last picture on the storyboard. He walks down the hallway and he goes into the living room, and who's there? A hooded figure, just like the one he had just drawn in his comic book, with a gun pointed to his wife's head. And it was such an instant synchronicity and such a
Mm.
meaningful
Yeah.
coincidence that he
Yeah.
immediately went into an altered state of consciousness. So I believe myself that art definitely has an effect. And like Austin Osman Spare said, art is just whatever's latent in the subconscious.
Yeah.
But I really
And
love.
synchronicity, which you mentioned there, is a
Mhm.
really important thing. We can't discount it. I don't, I don't think. And Genesis P. Orridge used to talk about synchronicity a lot. So did Burroughs. So it all comes around like a big circle.
It does, and there's the chaos magic thing of synchromysticisms, where we base entire rituals and things on synchronicities.
Hmm.
Yeah, it all ties in together. It's been such a really great conversation, Lee. I've been wanting to talk to you for.
Thanks for all the intelligent questions and really interesting approaches that you've taken,
Thank
Joe.
you. I
I
mean, it's
appreciate it.
no, I appreciate finally getting to talk to you. This conversation, in my mind, has been 7 years in the making. Um,
Oh,
I
well, I'm very flattered. Thank you for that.
No, that's fine. I've been wanting to pick your brain for a long time, Lee, and you definitely did
Yeah,
not
well, I'm sure we'll chat
disappoint.
again. Yeah.
Excellent. Yes, definitely. Just closing thoughts. Final thoughts on pop culture influence on magic. To say anything, do you think there's a lot of merit to it? I know we've sort of already gone over everything.
Yeah, look,
Do, do
if
you?
you're into comics and everybody knows who Alan Moore is, right?
Mhm.
The creator of From Hell, the creator of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Alan Moore is one of the biggest figures in comics that was in the last 20 or 30 years.
Mhm.
And he considers himself a magician. So to me, he's a real good example of how pop culture and magic can go together. He practices magic, but he practices it through his comic book writing and the vision that he brings to the graphic novel. So yeah, if you haven't gotten into Alan Moore, definitely get into him.
Excellent. And Grant Morrison too.
And Grant Morrison too, absolutely.
Awesome. Lee, thank you so much. This has been such a great chat. I hope we get to speak again. There's probably more things I wanted to ask you that I have forgotten. I haven't been able to, but I just want to say thank you for being the first guest on Faith from
Okay, man.
Fiction. It's
No,
it's been it's
no
been great
problem.
talking with you.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks
Pleasure
so
talking.
much, Lee. Have a good one.
Okay. Bye, Jake.
Bye,
Thank
Lee.
you.
Thank you.